The interesting part about a strategy process for me personally is that when people start to use culture as an excuse for something that you cannot do, strategically speaking, that will never work in our business because the culture goes against that. Culture lives through people. So if people do not support your strategy, the question is always, is it because of the strategy or is it because of the people?
Hello and welcome to episode 165 of the Ben Morton Leadership Podcast. It's the weekly show that brings you inspiring interviews with MDs, CEOs and thought leaders from around the globe. And it's all designed to help you be the very best leader you can possibly be. It's my gift to you and it's absolutely free. In today's episode, we are joined by Alex Brueckmann. Alex is a strategy facilitator, a speaker, and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. With his extensive expertise in strategy and leadership, Alex has made a profound impact on businesses all around the world, from established corporations to burgeoning startups. He is the author of The Strategy Legacy and Secrets of Next Level Entrepreneurs, two seminal works that offer invaluable insights into thriving in business whilst maintaining that work-life balance. Alex's journey, marked by his dedication to continuous learning and development, is testament to his commitment to empowering others to achieve their full potential. In this episode, here is some of the things that you can expect to learn. How to have a positive impact as a leader, and what to do when people do not support the strategy. You'll also learn about how to make strategic choices about what not to do, whether culture really does eat strategy for breakfast, as the meme often accredited to Peter Drucker says, and also how the best mistake Alex ever made can help you to become a better leader. Plus, of course, lots more. That's it by way of an introduction, so let's dive right in and please enjoy my interview with Alex Brueckmann. Alex, can we start off by me asking you about your first memorable leadership experience in the workplace, that first time when you saw someone being a leader and what you remember of it, and how that's gone on to shape and impact you in the workplace and as a leader?
It's actually an interesting encounter that I made. It was in the process of interviewing for my first post-university job, and the person who wanted to hire me asked me a pretty unusual question. He asked me whether I wanted to have kids, and I said, yeah, for sure, at some point. And then he looked at me and was like, if you want to grow a career in management and leadership, you better have them fast or early. That's what he meant.
Wow.
I let it slip at that point. I should have asked why he said that. I just politely nodded, thanked him for the advice, and that was it. But in the end, it turned out he was right. I mean, I am a very late bloomer when it comes to being a dad. So I'm in my mid-40s. My son is 4 years old. So running a business and juggling the responsibilities of a parent are not always easy, as they say.
So just out of curiosity, I can't leave that story hanging there for the benefit of listeners. So did you take that job? Did you get offered that job? What's the next couple of phases in that story?
I got offered a job, I took the job, and I grew with that CEO for 4.5 years into a new position, and we had quite the ride, and I'm thankful for that experience.
Yeah. And what did you sort of learn from that particular CEO? Were there any particular lessons you took that you then continued to use yourself?
I think one of the things that I really learned from him was that you should not let things slip, like stay on it until the work is done. And also I learned a few things along the way that I found really interesting that I didn't fully understand at that point in time. So we were restructuring a business at that point, and a few things were in the air, like, can we outsource a few non-core services? Does that help us with cost savings, et cetera, et cetera? And a few things that we didn't fully understood were on the table. So, and he said something that I found really interesting and that I took to heart, and that I'm now, as an entrepreneur myself, really take to heart. He said, you cannot outsource anything that you don't understand first, because you don't know what you're outsourcing. And therefore, if you don't know what you're outsourcing, your outsourcing partner might play you, because in the end, you don't know what you want and you don't know what you get. So that was a really smart advice that I took on very early from him. I think the second one, which I personally benefited from a lot, was his focus on helping me as a young manager, fresh out of university or business school, to get a head around how I show up, like my emotional intelligence, how I interact with more senior people. He gave me the opportunity to work with an executive coach early on. So he asked his entire executive team to work with an executive coach. And at that point, I was his assistant. And he gave me the same opportunity, which I incredibly thankful for, not only because it helped me to get some of my blind spots figured out, but also eventually that executive coach several years later became my business partner. So we grew a company together at some point. You never know, how these connections that you make during a lifetime turn out to be really more than face value.
Yeah, and I think that piece around you never know where these connections lead to is so powerful, right? On a very recent episode, I was interviewing a guy called Andy Lightfoot, who is the CEO of Space NK, a big retailer. And he said literally he has hundreds of people come through his door pitching products to him. And he says most of the time the stuff you're getting pitched is either rubbish, been done before, or it's not going to work. He said, but he's always really conscious of letting them down really nicely, because you never know, the next idea they bring to you might be amazing. And if you're a bit of a what to them, then they're not going to come back and pitch to you again. So you never do know, do you, where paths might cross again, or where that connection might come in useful for you or them or someone else. So that it really is important, isn't it, to manage those connections and think about how you show up.
And even if it's not because of the money, I mean, obviously this story tells me a lot, two main things. One is, if you let people down in a brutal way or in a not so pleasant way, they might resent you and don't present their $1 million idea to you at some point. But that's just not about it. It's about how you show up as a human being. Because if you let someone down easily, the way they go back and the way they show up for their families, for their friends, for their coworkers will be different than if you treat them like garbage.
Totally. And Alex, we'll get on to talking about strategy in just a moment, because that's something I'm really keen to explore with you. But back to the CEO, the executive coach that he gave you the opportunity to work with around your impact and how you show up. If there's just one thing you could share with my listeners that you took away from that coach and that you continue to use, what would it be?
There's so many things. Where do I start? I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned in that entire process of developing from a business school graduate to an executive assistant, then to a strategy manager, eventually into an entrepreneur, I believe the most interesting learning for me personally was that sometimes you just don't know. You don't know, and it's okay. And not knowing allows you to, first of all, accept that you don't know and be comfortable with it. And instead of trying to BS your way out of it, or like be a bit of an entertainer or a showman, not showing your vulnerabilities, not letting people look into your soul, you allow yourself to learn and you allow yourself to grow. And while doing that authentically, people are offering help and support and advice that you would have never gotten if you hadn't shown up authentically. That is one of the things I struggled with a lot in my younger years. Not knowing means being weak, and I did not want to show up as a weak manager. So I was pretty hot-headed in the early days of my career. And I managed to learn more, to accept more, that first of all, you can never know enough. And then to embrace that as something that I truly enjoy. So learning has become such an integral part of who I am, not only about business, but also about parenting, for example. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm messing up constantly.
As do we all.
It's just a matter of fact that when you are a first time parent, you don't know. You don't know anything. And everything you thought you knew, yeah, forget it. Your toddler has
Yeah.
different plans.
And parenting is the biggest leadership job in the world ever, because you're never off duty in that job. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true.
I'm sitting with a big smile on my face listening to you talk, as I'm sure will regular listeners of the show be, because what you've just shared there in that story around thinking that you had to have all of the answers and getting comfortable with saying, I don't know, and knowing that you don't know, and the fact that that's not a sign of weakness is probably the single biggest theme that has come out of 160 plus episodes of this show from all the MDs and CEOs that I've interviewed. And so many of them say the moment they got comfortable with not knowing and realized they didn't have to have all of the answers, that's when things just took off. And when they started to really enjoy that senior role they found themselves in. It's such a powerful lesson that I really,
Wholeheartedly
really
agree.
hope. Yeah, I just really hope for those that don't quite believe it yet, this is another chance to go, now Alex is saying that works. Let's
Just try it.
accept it
Just try
myself.
it. It doesn't hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. So where did your sort of real interest in strategy come from, Alex? What started to take you down into that niche and lead you to where you are today?
Strategy in business school has been a topic that I did not enjoy, to be very honest. I was
Right.
way more into the marketing piece and into learning foreign languages. And, strategy for me felt, even in business school, even with a lot of, let's say, real life case studies, it felt intangible for me because there was no clear connection to my pre-business school career as a content creator. So originally, I'm a radio host. I designed and hosted radio shows, and produced media content for quite some years before I went to business school. So I couldn't see the connection, and it felt just not real for me. And then going back to that boss we talked about, got the possibility to work as his executive assistant and then as a strategy manager, helping to turn around a huge industrial production company in Europe. And the thing is, restructuring, turning a company around is not really strategy. Strategy is way more than that. You can do strategy once you've turned around the ship, once you are in calmer waters, once you stop the financial bleeding. Before you do that, there is just no space, no headspace for strategy. And you really can't do strategy unless you have prepared, let's say, the grounds for it. We were in that process. We were seeing good progress, and I started to realize that strategy as such, as a topic, has a massive impact on thousands of people when you do it right. Also, when you do it wrong, by the way, but then in a negative way, of course. So I realized in that process, in those years, that the work that I do matters. It matters. It helps families protect their income, protect their workspaces. It helps avoid stupid mistakes. It helps avoid complacency and everything that comes with it. I also realized that not everything that you think you can do will find open ears and support everywhere. So it also helped me a lot to figure out how to maneuver board dynamics, how to maneuver works council dynamics, all these big stakeholder groups that play a massive role when it comes to strategy. It taught me a valuable lesson. Even if you do your best, sometimes things don't work out the way you want to. That phase, those 3 to 4 years in that role as a strategy manager, really helped me understand that there is huge passion in that topic. And I allowed myself to then dig into that. I became a management consultant afterwards, which wasn't quite what I expected in the sense of the fulfillment that I got out of it, which then led me to take a step back and leave the well-paid consulting gig and basically start to become an entrepreneur, which financially is difficult in the beginning. But if you allow yourself to follow your heart and follow your passion and build something that brings the best of both worlds together, the best from the consulting world, the best from the leadership world, and you start to help clients with real world issues and you see the results, that gives you such an incredible amount of fulfillment that you can live for a couple of years with a little bit of less money in your pockets, because the success will come. The success will come if you follow your heart, if you follow your passion. And I know for some people out there that might sound a bit eclectic or idealistic, but it is what I found true time and again. So when I started my new business after moving to Canada, I saw exactly the same pattern again. It is hard to build a new business in a different continent, especially during the COVID years. But if you stay true to yourself, if you follow your path, if you know what you want, if you know the value that you deliver to a certain target group, and if you can articulate that properly, success will follow. And I think that passion of strategy has just never let its grip. It's just has been there for, oh my God, 15, 16, 17 years now. The more I dig into, the more I realize how little I actually know and how much more there is to learn, which is an amazing feeling, because it just tells me there will always be more for me to explore, which is great.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Really amazing story. And I guess, Alex, we should probably start off by actually defining the word strategy here. And the reason I say that is in my work, when I'm running leadership training courses, and previously when I was doing a lot of team development work, which I don't do these days, but I started to realize there are all these words that we commonly use in business. And even in really senior teams, we assume that everybody has the same understanding or definition of these words. And I've come to realize for experience that's absolutely not the case. Like, it's typically things like vision, mission, and purpose. People have different views about what they are. It could be client and customer, strategy, for example. So, what's your sort of working definition of strategy for those who just might be afraid to ask the question? But let me ask the idiot question for everybody. Your definition of strategy.
And Ben, your story just shows that it's not at all an idiot question. I've seen exactly the same issues in leadership teams, that we just assume we have the same understanding, maybe based on the book that we read.
Yeah.
And we assume everyone has read the book, which is not true. And then all of a sudden, like 3 hours into a discussion, heated debate, we just realize we're not talking about the same thing. We might use the same term, but we're not talking at all about the same thing.
Yeah. Or worse, we don't realize and we make important decisions when we're bluffing, right?
Yeah. Oh my God, that's even worse. Then you realize at the end of the day or a week that you've just wasted a ton of time for nothing. So that is the reason why I started when I wrote the strategy legacy. That's the reason why I started relatively early in the book with a few short descriptions. I don't even want to use the term definition, because it's just my definition. It's the label that I use with the description that I use. And the reason I do that is because the book talks about the 9 elements of organizational identity, and they all have all these 9 elements have a certain label and a certain description to it. And you can use different labels, you can use different descriptions, as long as they make sense in an integrated way. As long as these elements connect to each other and you know how which label supports which,
Yeah.
that's totally fine. And to answer your question, when it comes to strategy, I actually don't define the term strategy in the book. I define a term that is more granular. I use the term strategy map as a visual depiction of the choices that you make to achieve a vision. Now, that is just one granular step more than saying a strategy is an integrated set of choices that you make to win in your market. And that is, in the words of the famous Roger Martin, of course, who defined it in such a beautiful way that I don't need to find other words.
Do you also view strategy, especially when it comes to choices? Because I heard this many years ago when I was doing my formal HR qualifications, and I wish I could remember who said it. And it was back in the day when, if you did a sort of learning program, part of your resources, you got sent a CD with some audio to listen to. Now, there'll be a few people listening who don't even know what a CD is, but on this CD, there was a business professor talking about strategy. And he said, to paraphrase, strategy is as much about the choices around what you won't do as it is what you will do. Like, what's your view on that? Because those choices around what we won't do, I think, are the hardest ones, right? There might be what seems like a great opportunity, but if it's not fully aligned to to our vision and our objectives, the strong companies, the great companies will say, yeah, but that's not what we do, and it's going to derail us from getting here. What's your thoughts on that, Alex?
Strategy is about knowing what not to do is often associated with Michael Porter, one of the Harvard business grands in strategy, Harvard Business School. And it's also often attributed to the late Steve Jobs. And it is 100% clear that this is true, because you can approach it from two angles. You can ask yourself, what are the few things that we over-index on? What are the choices that we make? What do we want to do? And say no to everything else. Or you approach it from the other direction, ask yourself, what will not help? Like, you do a kind of a pre-mortem and ask yourself slightly in a humorous way, what would we have to do to mess this up entirely?
Yeah, I love those sorts of questions. Yeah.
And that works really well. If you put in some humor into those often serious conversations, people tend to realize pretty quickly that there are a few things that they should either stop doing, or a few ideas that they've been entertaining for a while, which they at heart know will never get them to where they want to be. So I believe that you can create great strategy with both approaches. I tend to combine them in a certain way.
So do you find sort of asking those opposite questions to be quite impactful? Because one of the questions I often ask like that in a leadership training program, if maybe we're doing some stuff around keeping people engaged and motivated, I'll often ask the question, like, what would you need to do to really piss off your people? Or what would you need to do to really demotivate your people? And actually, to find a list of things to do there, people find shockingly easy. And I have this very funny moment sort of after 15 minutes of discussion where I point at the flip chart and go, don't do any of that. And there's the answer to keeping your team motivated. But had I flipped it and said, right, what are all the things you can do to keep your team motivated, which I've done in the past, people often find that a lot harder. Do you find the same when you're asking those flip questions with reference to strategy? Hey, quick interruption for you. You just heard me talking to Alex there about asking the opposite question during some of my leadership programs. Well, if you want to know more about those leadership training programs that are regularly described as transformational and life-changing by my clients, head to the leadership training section of my website at ben-morton.com to find out more. And I'll also pop the link in the show notes for you. Back to the episode.
Absolutely, 100%. And the funny thing is, when we ask people what they think they should do, when someone asks me that question, what my brain does is, what do I need to do that I'm not doing now? And that is often difficult because we are sometimes not even aware of the good things we're doing.
Yeah.
But when someone asks us, what do we need to do in addition? At least that's what we hear, even if that's not the question. That's where my brain goes. And countering that with, okay, what do you already know does not work? What do you already know you should not do? That's a super easy thing to answer, because I'm not doing it for a reason, because I know.
Yeah.
And asking the question the other way around, like a positive question, drives me down this rabbit hole of, okay, what else can I do? And sometimes it's not what else you can do. Sometimes it's just being clear about what you are doing already that is delivering the desired results. And filtering that out is often way more difficult because a lot is subconscious.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to tap into our subconscious. Yeah, subconscious. I think that's the word.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Alex. And along with tapping into the subconscious, I think asking those flipped questions also means perhaps we don't put ourselves into that fight or flight mode, and we don't appear too critical of ourselves to start with. Because the one I use around how would you really demotivate or piss people off, straight away we can think about all the things that we've seen other leaders do. And then perhaps when it's written down on paper and had a bit of a laugh, then we can look at it and go, but truly on a bad day, which of those do I do? Which is, if you just said to somebody, what are some of your dark side leadership traits, the things you're not proud of on a bad day? It's a bit harder to get to them, right? Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Alex, back to something you said earlier on when you was referencing Steve Jobs and Michael Porter. Seeing as we're quoting some of the greats, let's quote someone else. I can see you smiling already because I think you know what question I'm gonna ask you. A good old Peter Drucker quote, the one you see on LinkedIn and kind of memes, maybe on Instagram all the time, which interestingly isn't a Peter Drucker quote at all. Even the Peter Drucker Institute says that he never said it. So for those of you listening who don't know where I'm going with this, it's the good old culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? He never said it. Apparently the quote was first attributed to him after he'd passed away. But what the Institute say Peter Drucker did say was culture, no matter how defined, is singularly persistent. So, as that of the setup, what's your take, Alex, on the intersection between culture and strategy? Because I know you've got an interest in both, right?
Well, strategy and culture, they need each other, right? And you cannot not have a culture. So every organization does have a culture, whether you want it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, whether you build it consciously or not, or intentionally or not. It is there. Something is there. And sometimes, depending, and I'm working with an organization right now that is deeply aware of that. It's a relatively new organization, and a lot of people in the business have come from competitors. So they're all bringing their types of meetings, their types of thinking, their types of decision making, their types of arguing into that new business. And they've created some sort of a Frankenstein's monster in terms of culture. Because in the beginning, they were not conscious about that. They were not intentional about forming a unique culture for that business. So everyone could just bring their understanding of certain cultural aspects, from how I treat people. Do I scream in a meeting when I'm upset or not? Like, all these kinds of things are now running rampant in that organization. And people are like, what's going on here? I had that meeting yesterday and it was completely different than the meeting that I had 2 days prior with different people. So it is just very, very interesting to see how that dynamic unfolds and how that culture creates itself if you don't take care of it. Now, the interesting part about a strategy process for me personally is that when people start to use culture as an excuse for something that you cannot do, strategically speaking, that will never work in our business because the culture goes against that. And you need to ask yourself a few really tough questions. Culture lives through people. So if people do not support your strategy, the question is always, is it because of the strategy or is it because of the people? And you can use a strategy process if you use it intentionally and you widen its scope slightly so that it does not just touch the strategic business questions, but that it actually touches who are we, how do we want to operate, and how are we going to be successful. It's not about what we do anymore only. It's how do we do it, like doing the right thing and doing it in the right way. Then you can use a strategy process to form, to shape, to mend culture in an interesting way. What you actually do is you define a few questions, or you answer a few questions about your organizational identity. You go into like the softer territory that often people think is an HR exercise or a committee exercise. You talk about the impact that you want to have as a business, based on the purpose that you have. You talk about organizational values on a way deeper level than just putting them on posters and hanging them up in the corridors or the water cooler. You touch values and you ask yourself, what do these values mean for everyone? How do we use them in terms of the behaviors that we want to see? And also negatively defined, what are the behaviors that we will not accept? When you do that, when you combine those cultural elements with those strategic elements, what you're asking yourself in the end is, what does performance look like? How do we build a people-centric high performance culture? And that means everyone knows how they contribute to strategy and everyone knows the way they contribute to strategy. So you can obviously build an extremely toxic workplace if everyone is fully aligned on your goals and they try to reach them no matter what. You create a toxic elbow culture where winning becomes the only acceptable target. If you are smart as a leader, you avoid that because it's a short-lived success. You're poisoning the well if you do that, if you let people behave in certain ways. To counter that, the people-centric high-performance cultures that I have seen, they have conversations about their values and how they show up in their behaviors. And it is not just about winning, it's about winning in the right way, in the way we want to win. You could use terms like fair and square, you could use terms like not at all cost, whatever it is, that will be very specific to your organization. If you don't balance culture and strategy, it can either become purely culture driven, which is kind of a tree hugger place to be, where being nice to each other is more important than getting work done. And on the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, you would have the win at all cost toxic workplace that you don't want either. So there is a spectrum between those two. You need to find your ground somewhere on that spectrum where both people-centric behaviors and performance orientation based on your strategy go hand in hand.
That's really interesting, Alex. And listening to you talk there as well, it strikes me that another big challenge is when you throw in another cultural element, another sort of way of doing things around here that sounds nice, perhaps is popular in the business management sort of media, but actually isn't aligned to your strategy. And that probably happens quite a lot, right? You look at another company's values and you go, oh, everyone's talking about innovation. We've got to have that in our 5 company values. But actually, there'll be many organizations where innovation isn't and doesn't need to be part of their strategy. But if you lob that in there into the mix, when you're not aligning your culture with your strategy, it just, to your point, it gets really difficult, right? Because you've got people trying to behave in an innovative way, which is going to be impeding what you're going to do, which isn't about innovation at the minute. It's just about streamlining kind of what we do and getting as many widgets out of the factory as we possibly can. So yeah, that piece around what culture do we need often gets missed, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah. There is this whole, like, innovation is a very good example that's being driven through the village. And then, half a year later, it's a different thing like DEI. And then the year later, it's ESG. And then the year later, something else. And then it's AI. And you're just standing there observing this. And you're like, guys, you're missing the point. ESG, DEI, AI, innovation. These aren't cultures. These aren't strategies. These are just important things you need to take care of in a certain way, depending on what type of business you run, where you are in the maturity cycle. And frankly speaking, sometimes you don't need to take care of it. Like it's a ESG and DI are great examples. Who are they for? Who benefits from those as an organization? If you run a 5-person business, these topics that you see everywhere in the management media, they might have very little influence on how you operate your business. Other topics might be way more important to you. So we always need to understand the waves that we're seeing crashing over us. And don't get me wrong, I'm all about understanding the benefits of things like innovation, DEI, ESG, but use them in the sense that they work for your organization. If your entire organization is just happy that they are a diverse, inclusive, and a workplace where people just thrive and are nice to each other and do the kind thing, the right thing, that is all good. But you also need to get the work done. It doesn't matter in the end. If you build a workplace where everyone thrives, this is great. And if you do it in a strategic way, you will benefit from that. But just implementing, for example, DEI policies has never helped anyone, because it's what happens after those policies are in place. How do you live it? How do you bring it to life? Are you real about it? Or is it just a lip service like so many organizations do in so many fields?
That's a really great metaphor you've just shared there about these waves crashing over us, which my brain often works in metaphors. So as you was talking, I was just expanding that in my head and suddenly got all excited about it. It's a bit like a surfer, and you've got this massive wave coming at you. Well, you've got to choice, a strategic choice to make, right? Is this a wave that I'm going to jump on and surf? If so, great. Or is it one where I'm going to push the front of my board down and go through it, and I'm going to see what the next one is and decide if that's one I want to surf, or if that's another one where I just let it pass over me because it's not important to our business right now, our people right now. So we're gonna let it go. We don't have to surf every wave that comes our way, do we?
Oh, a lot of people do that. They try that. Those are the what I call hustlepreneurs. There's just the next idea coming, and all of a sudden they jump ship. Yesterday they were the expert on A, and today they are the expert on a completely different thing. And you ask yourself, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
How do you build expertise in that field overnight? The whole AI ChatGPT wave was a perfect example where everyone all of a sudden tried to jump on. Well, not everyone, fortunately. A lot of people tried to jump on that bandwagon and tried to establish themselves as some sort of an expert of adopting AI in their industry. And I'm like, you have not even got a glance of what AI is. You have seen ChatGPT, and all you're raving about is a large language model. And because it is so breakthrough, it just blew us all away. But let's be honest, how much is left of that now that they've been around for a year? It is interesting how the psyche of people works in these instances. And I'm not condemning or complaining. It is simply you need to be aware of what works for your business. And the thing is, if you do not have a clear strategy in place how you win in your chosen market, all of these waves become just another shiny object for you. And then you jump ship, and then you're like, oh, this is the thing we've needed. Now we have it. Let's use it, and we're going to be successful. No. If you have a clear strategy in place, you benchmark the shiny object against your strategy, and you ask yourself, does this thingy help us get where we want to get faster, more efficiently, in a better way? And if your answer is yes, then by all means, use it. And if your answer is, I'm not sure about that, probably not, then let it go.
Yeah. And that's tough, right? Because I don't know what the psychologist, behavioralist would say about this, but it very much strikes me that as human beings, we have got a filter for the new and shiny and spotting it and getting excited by it. So it can be very hard not to get distracted by the new and shiny. But I guess to your point, if we've got a clearly defined strategy, then it's much easier to, as you say, to benchmark it. Whereas if we haven't got the strategy, then anything is up for grabs, right? It's like going on a journey with no map. If you don't know where you're going, then any direction is the correct one, but it doesn't mean you're going to be happy with where you end up.
Yeah. Just imagine yourself walking into the restaurant of a beautiful all-inclusive resort, right? There is this massive buffet in front of you, and also the waiter asks you whether they can bring you anything in particular. Just imagine walking in there being hungry versus walking in there being intentional what you put into your body. The result of what you will eat is extremely different.
Yeah. Don't say that to my 12-year-old daughter. She loves a holiday buffet, and she comes back to the table with some very weird things on her plate. Alex, let me just turn to the title of your book. There's one particular question I wanted to ask you about that I realize kind of could potentially sound a little challenging, but it's purely from a place of curiosity. So the title, The Strategy Legacy, How to Future-Proof Your Business and Leave Your Mark. I'm just really interested in your view around future-proofing, what that means, and whether you can or not. And the reason I ask is when I first read that, it reminded me of something Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, it reportedly said at an all hands meeting back in 2018, which I've got written here. So allegedly he said, I predict one day Amazon will fail. Amazon will go bankrupt. If you look at large companies, their lifespans tend to be 30 plus years, not 100 plus years. So like with that as the backdrop, and incidentally, in the 6 years since he reportedly said that, I think it's quite unlikely that Amazon's ever going to go bankrupt. But what's your view on that, on the longevity of companies? What does future-proofing mean? And is that really really possible?
Theoretically, I believe it is 100% possible. Practically, we have seen examples over examples that there comes a moment in the life cycle of an organization where things start to go sideways before they go south. There are many great examples of that we all know that have been dissected in business schools, from Kodak to Nokia. Nokia is a wonderful example. The company had reinvented itself many, many times over their life cycle before they actually kind of lost the whole mobile phone game. They have just stopped doing that. They had stopped reinventing themselves, their products, their services, which they had a great track record of doing. They started out as a rubber company, not as a high-tech company. So when you realize how companies can change and why they all of a sudden stop, and Nokia has been the subject for many studies where they figured out eventually that internal politics and power games and an inflated leadership body that was more interested in securing their own little kingdoms than doing the right thing and producing customer value was eventually the reason of the demise. And as long as you don't do that, you have a very good chance of staying in the game. And there is one company that is really, really great at that, like asking themselves constantly, what is the value that we produce here for the customer? It is Amazon. And there are other companies that have learned from them. The two pizza rule, the empty chair at the table in the meeting room, like all these things where you ask yourself, what is the right thing to do for the customer? If you approach your business, your strategy from a customer centric perspective, asking the question, what is the value that we produce for the customer? And how do we sustain that? How do these expectations change over time? What is it that they will need in 2 or 3 years from us? Then you are in that cycle of constantly reinventing or developing further what you do and for whom. As long as you don't stop doing that and have your finger on the pulse, my personal feeling is like you're 90% there. And then there are these acts of God or halo events, or call them whatever you want, like COVID. There's a global pandemic crushing a lot of businesses. There's a little bit more to securing the future of your business than just having a great strategy. You also need to do your homework, and you need to put in place management systems that allow you to react. You need to have financial stability, et cetera, et cetera. But those are management topics. Those aren't the strategic topics. So that's how you operate a business. That's how you make sure it doesn't get under the bus just because you might not be able to sell products for 2 months. So there are a few things that you can do and you should do, you need to do if you are serious about growing a business, if you're serious about providing for the people that work for you and helping them secure their livelihood. And one of those things is being 100% clear about the strategy that helps you win in your chosen market. And it's always shocking to me how few organizations really do have a clearly articulated strategy in place. If you don't do that, for me personally, it's unethical. As a leader, that is irresponsible and unethical, because you are responsible. People look up to you. You are in that seat. You get paid a buttload of money for a reason. So do your job. And your job is not to understand the operations anymore when you're in the executive chair.
Hear, hear. Yeah, we're speaking the same language, drinking the same Kool-Aid, Alex, as they say. Yeah. Love it. Alex, to wrap up, let me ask my standard closing question. What would you say is the best mistake that you've ever made?
It's funny that you asked that question today, because I said it yesterday to my girlfriend. I think the best mistake I've ever made was letting go a very successful business in Europe and move to Canada and start from scratch. That taught me so much that would be at least one additional episode, Ben. So if I draw a line, the core learning of that in inverted commas mistake is that if you dare, at some point you will win. You just need to dare for a long time, right? As they say, every overnight success has been years in the making. That's where I am right now. When you realize that you let go of something that is profitable, that is really successful, and you allow yourself to start from scratch, you also allow yourself to learn a whole, just so many new things. And those new things will just stack up over time. And if you if you dare to stay with it, if you dare to believe in yourself, because at the beginning it's always hard. There's no one else clapping for you, so you better clap for yourself until others start clapping for you. If you dare to do that, and if you dare to stick with it, there is so much in it for you to learn, to explore, and to experience. As I said in the beginning of our conversation today, for me personally, that is one of the reasons why I do what I do, because I enjoy learning so much.
Love that. That brings me to one of my favorite quotes of all time, which was from a guy called Will Durant. And he said, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit." It's that consistency compounding over time. Alex, thank you so much for your time. If people want to find out more about you, your work, or your book, what's the best place for them to go, please?
Obviously, it's LinkedIn. I live there more or less. You will find me there, but also obviously my website, alexthestrategist.com. And for those of you who dare to write my surname, it's brueckmann.ca. There you find a ton of additional materials, resources, and also my blog lives on that website. So if you're a reader, be my guest.
Brilliant. And don't worry about the spelling. For everybody listening at home, we'll pop the links in the show notes for you, so you don't need to even try. So there you have it. That was episode 165 and my interview with Alex Brueckmann. I really hope it was valuable and you took something away from it. And if you did, please do drop me a line on social media to let me know. It'll give me that little boost of energy and motivation to keep recording this show for you. Couple of things before you go. If you are looking for some leadership development training for your team or your organization, remember to check out the relevant pages on my website at ben-morton.com, and the link to those pages is also in the show notes for you. And one final thing, a small favor to ask of you. If you are getting value from this show, then please could you click the follow button wherever you happen to be listening, and perhaps even share the link to the show with your friends, colleagues, or family. Those two things really do provide massive support to me, and they really do enable us to keep bringing you more and more episodes of the show. That's it for today's episode. As always, look after yourself. Look after those you've got the privilege and responsibility to lead. And until next time, lead on.